The old community center stood at the heart of Pine Valley, its weathered brick walls holding decades of stories. On a crisp autumn morning, the aroma of fresh coffee and homemade pastries wafted through the air as residents gathered for what would become an unexpected turning point in our neighborhood's history. I never imagined that a simple town hall meeting would transform into something so much more meaningful. My camera had been rolling since dawn, capturing the quiet moments before people started trickling in. As a documentary filmmaker, I'd seen my fair share of community gatherings, but something about this one felt different. The tension in the air was palpable. Our once tight-knit community had been growing apart, divided by misunderstandings and unspoken fears. The meeting was meant to discuss the renovation of the community center, but beneath the surface lay deeper issues. Some wanted to preserve its traditional charm, while others pushed for modern changes to accommodate our evolving neighborhood. The divide wasn't just about the building. It was about identity, belonging, and the future we wanted to create together. Sarah, a local baker who lived here for 40 years, sat in the front row, clutching her recipe book like a shield. Next to her was David, a tech entrepreneur who'd moved in last year with dreams of creating a digital learning space for kids. They represented different worlds, different perspectives, but what happened next would challenge everything I thought I knew about human connection. As the room filled up, I noticed something remarkable through my lens. Despite their differences, people naturally gravitated toward each other, sharing small talks and shy smiles. A grandmother teaching a young professional how to properly fold her famous dumplings. A college student helping an elderly neighbor set up a smartphone to show pictures of his grandchildren. These tiny moments of connection were happening everywhere, if you just knew where to look. But then came the moment that would change everything. As the meeting was about to begin, the lights suddenly went out. In the darkness, someone started humming a familiar tune, an old folk song that had been sung in this very hall for generations. One by one, voices joined in, some in different languages, creating an impromptu chorus that filled the darkness with unexpected harmony. When the emergency lights finally flickered on, something had shifted. The rigid seating arrangements had dissolved as people huddled together, sharing stories and laughter. The boundaries that seemed so important moments ago felt insignificant in the face of shared human experience. Yet this was just the beginning. As I continued filming, I realized I was witnessing something rare and precious. The real, unscripted moments where people choose to reach across their differences and find common ground. But the path forward wouldn't be easy. The deep-rooted concerns that had divided our community couldn't be solved with one magical moment of connection. As the meeting finally began, the real challenge lay ahead. Could these moments of unexpected harmony survive the difficult conversations to come? Could we preserve these fragile bridges we'd built while honestly addressing the changes facing our community? The answer would unfold in ways none of us could have predicted, testing our commitment to understanding each other in ways both beautiful and challenging. The room buzzed with nervous energy as Council President Richardson called the meeting to order. The emergency lights cast long shadows across worried faces, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere that my camera couldn't resist capturing. But what happened next revealed layers of our community's story that no one had expected to uncover. An elderly resident slowly stood up, her voice shaking slightly as she shared how the community center had been her sanctuary when she first arrived in Pine Valley as a refugee 30 years ago. She spoke of English classes in the basement, of friendships formed over shared meals, and of children who grew up running through these halls. Her words painted a picture of a place that had been more than just a building. It had been a bridge between worlds. The tech entrepreneur, David, listened intently, his earlier enthusiasm for modernization tempered by understanding. When it was his turn to speak, he surprised everyone by suggesting a compromise. What if we could preserve the heart of the old while embracing the possibilities of the new? His proposal involved creating a digital archive of community stories, ensuring that the history of this place would live on even as the building evolved. But it wasn't just about the building anymore. As more people shared their stories, deeper truths emerged. We learned about the small businesses struggling to keep up with rising costs, about young families searching for affordable childcare, about seniors feeling isolated in an increasingly digital world. Each story was a thread in a complex tapestry of community life, revealing how interconnected our challenges really were. The atmosphere in the room shifted again when someone mentioned the upcoming Heritage Festival. For decades, it had been the crown jewel of Pine Valley's calendar, but participation had dwindled in recent years. The festival had become another symbol of our changing times, caught between tradition and transformation. Sarah, the baker who'd been quietly listening all this time, suddenly spoke up. Her voice carried the weight of 40 years of community memory as she described how the festival had evolved over the decades. She told us about the year a drought nearly canceled the celebration, but the community came together to create an indoor marketplace instead. Her story reminded us that change wasn't new to Pine Valley. We'd faced it before and emerged stronger. As the meeting progressed, small groups began forming organically around shared interests and concerns. I watched through my lens as a high school teacher, and a local artist sketched out ideas for intergenerational programs. Nearby, a group of small business owners huddled with tech-savvy college students, exploring ways to bridge the digital divide without losing the personal touch that made our community special. Yet beneath these promising connections, questions still lingered. The cost of renovation loomed large, and not everyone agreed on priorities. Some worried that any change would lead to gentrification, while others feared that resistance to change would lead to stagnation. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade, casting long shadows through the windows, but we were nowhere near a resolution. Then someone discovered an old box of photographs in a forgotten corner of the hall. As people gathered around to look, something unexpected began to unfold, a mystery that would force us to confront not just our present challenges, but secrets from our community's past that had been buried for generations. What we found in those photos would test our newfound connections in ways we never could have imagined. The photographs spilled across the old wooden table, yellowed with age but sharp with secrets. Through my camera lens, I captured the moment when Sarah's hand trembled as she pointed to a particular image, a groundbreaking ceremony from 1962. The community center's original construction had a story we'd never heard, one that made the current renovation debate pale in comparison. In the photo, a diverse group stood proud despite the tensions of the era, their faces showing determination and hope. The building, Sarah explained, had been funded by pooling resources from every corner of the community during a time when banks wouldn't give loans to certain neighborhoods. It was built by hand, brick by people who couldn't wait for the world to change. They had to create the change themselves. The room fell silent as more photos emerged, revealing how the community center had served as a silent witness to civil rights meetings, cultural celebrations, and countless moments of quiet resistance against discrimination. We discovered that Pine Valley's reputation for inclusivity hadn't happened by accident. It had been deliberately cultivated by everyday heroes whose names we'd never known. But the most startling discovery came when David, cross-referencing the old photos with his digital archives, uncovered something that made everyone gasp. The original blueprints showed a hidden room sealed off during a renovation in the 1970s. According to the documents, it contained something called the Community Time Capsule, meant to be opened 50 years after its sealing. That 50-year mark was exactly 2 weeks away. The excitement in the room was electric. Even the emergency lights seemed to pulse with anticipation as people realized what this could mean. The time capsule could hold crucial information about our community's past, perhaps even guidance for our future. But accessing it would require immediate action, the very renovation work we've been debating. Suddenly, the divide between preservation and progress didn't seem so clear-cut. To honor our past, we'd need to embrace change. To move forward, we'd need to understand where we come from. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the dusty windows, the energy shifted from excitement to urgency. The renovation deadline was approaching fast, and construction crews were scheduled to begin work in just 3 days. If we wanted to access the time capsule before any structural changes were made, we'd need to act quickly. But the room was divided on how to proceed. Some worried that opening the capsule might damage the building's structure. Others feared that construction would destroy it before we could reach it. The college students quickly formed a research team, poring over old building codes and structural plans. Local contractors huddled together, sketching possible solutions on the backs of envelopes. The stakes felt impossibly high. This wasn't just about preserving history anymore. It was about uncovering a message left specifically for us at exactly this moment in time. What had our predecessors wanted us to know? What wisdom had they tried to pass down? As the meeting stretched into the evening, the tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Every minute that passed was a minute lost. Through my viewfinder, I watched as unlikely alliances formed and dissolved. The tech entrepreneur and the elderly baker now sat side by side, studying building plans. The young activists and longtime residents brainstormed ways to document everything properly. But just as a plan started coming together, someone made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the corner of one of the photographs, barely visible in the fading light, was a detail that would force us to question everything we thought we knew about Pine Valley's history. The detail in the photograph was small but unmistakable. A sealed envelope tucked into the breast pocket of one of the original builders, with words clearly visible. Open only if demolition becomes necessary. My camera zoomed in on the faces around the room as this revelation sank in. The renovation plans we'd been debating didn't include demolition, but the structural report in David's hands told a different story. The emergency lights flickered ominously as he cleared his throat. The latest inspection had revealed that the building's foundation was far more compromised than anyone had realized. The cost of stabilizing it would be 3 times the renovation budget. The choice we thought we were facing, between preservation and progress, had just become much more complicated. We might not be able to save the building at all. Sarah, who had been quietly studying the old photographs, suddenly straightened up. "There's something else," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pulled out another photo, this one showing the building's cornerstone being laid. The date on the cornerstone in the photo didn't match the one currently on the building. Either the cornerstone had been replaced, or we were missing a crucial piece of our community's history. The room erupted into chaos. Local historians who had been documenting the evening's discoveries began frantically cross-referencing dates. The college students who had been researching building codes now turned their attention to historical records, their phones lighting up the dimness as they searched archives online. Something wasn't adding up. Through my lens, I captured the moment when understanding dawned on people's faces. If the cornerstone had been replaced, it meant the time capsule we thought we were racing to open might not be the original one. And if there was an earlier capsule, its 50-year opening date would have already passed. The message we were meant to receive could be decades overdue. The tech entrepreneur's suggestion of creating a digital archive suddenly seemed prophetic. What other pieces of our history had been altered, lost, or hidden? The very foundation of our community's story was being questioned, even as the physical foundation of our beloved building was failing. As if responding to our growing unease, a deep groaning sound emerged from the building's bowels. The floor vibrated slightly, and small pieces of plaster drifted down from the ceiling. The structural issues weren't just numbers in a report anymore. They were becoming dangerously real. The fire marshal, who had been quietly observing until now, stepped forward. We had 1 hour to evacuate the building and retrieve any historical documents we wanted to save. After that, the building would be sealed until structural engineers could perform a complete assessment. 1 hour to solve a mystery that had been decades in the making. The crowd divided into quick-forming teams, some gathering documents, others photographing everything in sight. The local restaurant owner arrived with hot coffee and sandwiches, setting up an impromptu command center on the front lawn. Our diverse community, which hours ago had been divided over renovation plans, now moved with singular purpose. But as we raced against time, a longtime resident who'd been unusually quiet all evening approached me, her face grave. She had worked as a secretary during the 1970s renovation and knew something about why the cornerstone had been replaced, information she'd kept secret for nearly 50 years. What she whispered into my microphone would transform our understanding of not just the building, but of the very events that had shaped Pine Valley's identity. The elderly secretary's words hung in the air like frost as my camera captured the shock rippling through the crowd gathered on the front lawn. The cornerstone had been replaced not to hide something, but to protect something. In 1973, During the height of local tensions, the original community leaders had feared their time capsule would be destroyed. Their solution was brilliant in its simplicity. They created two capsules. The first capsule, hidden behind the replacement cornerstone, was a decoy. The real one had been carefully sealed within the building's old chimney system, protected by the very architecture we've been debating whether to preserve. The secretary pulled out a weathered envelope from her handbag. Instructions for accessing both capsules passed down through a chain of trusted community members for half a century. As the structural engineers arrived with their equipment, time seemed to move in slow motion. The building's groans had grown more frequent, and hairline cracks were spreading across the walls like spider webs. We had precious little time to retrieve both capsules before the building would be declared completely off limits. David's tech expertise unexpectedly became our salvation. Using ground-penetrating radar borrowed from a local university, his team quickly located both capsules. The decoy was retrieved first, containing newspaper clippings, photographs, and letters that told the official story of Pine Valley. But when we reached the real capsule, carefully extracted from its hiding place in the chimney, the true weight of our community's history finally revealed itself. Inside were documents that showed how our community center had been more than just a gathering place. It had been a crucial stop on the Underground Railroad, and later, a sanctuary for civil rights activists. The original builders had created a space that looked simple on the surface but contained hidden rooms and passages designed to protect those seeking safety. The renovation plans we've been arguing about would have unknowingly destroyed this hidden architecture of hope. But the most powerful item in the capsule wasn't a document at all. It was a simple key attached to a note that read, "For the day when the walls must come down." Below was a map leading to a bank vault, untouched for 50 years, containing enough funds to rebuild the entire community center from the ground up. Those visionary leaders hadn't just left us a history lesson. They'd left us the means to preserve their legacy while building something new. They had known that someday the old building might not be salvageable, but they trusted future generations to carry forward its spirit of sanctuary and community. As this revelation swept through the crowd, something remarkable happened. The divisions that had seemed so important hours ago melted away. People who had argued fiercely about preservation versus progress now stood together, understanding that we had been given both a gift and a responsibility. The choice wasn't between holding onto the past or embracing the future. It was about finding a way to do both. David stepped forward with Sarah by his side, their earlier disagreements forgotten. They proposed a plan that would honor both the visible and invisible history of our community center. The new building would incorporate elements of the original architecture while adding modern spaces for digital learning and community engagement. Most importantly, it would include a permanent exhibition space where the full story of Pine Valley's role in social justice movements would finally be told. But just as we thought we had resolved everything, a final discovery in the capsule stopped everyone in their tracks. Beneath the key and documents lay a sealed envelope marked "Read Me Last," containing a prediction about Pine Valley's future that was so specific to our present moment that it left us questioning everything we thought we knew about time, community, and the threads that connect generations. The sealed envelope contained a letter that began with words that sent chills down our spines. To the people of Pine Valley, gathering in crisis on a day when the lights have gone out. The writer had somehow known not just that we would face this moment, but how we would come together to face it. The letter went on to describe, with uncanny accuracy, the challenges our community would be wrestling with, the tension between preservation and progress, the fear of losing our identity in a changing world, the struggle to bridge dividing lines. But what struck us most wasn't the prediction itself, it was the wisdom that followed. The true foundation of any community, the letter read, isn't in its buildings or its blueprints. It's in the courage of its people to see beyond their differences and recognize their shared story. As the structural engineers completed their final assessment in the growing darkness, our impromptu gathering on the lawn had transformed into something remarkable. Local restaurants continued bringing food, someone had strung up lights between the trees, and children played between clusters of adults who, just hours ago, had seen each other as opponents rather than neighbors. I captured through my lens the moment when Sarah and David presented their unified vision for the new community center. The plans honored the building's role as a sanctuary while embracing its potential as a bridge to the future. The hidden passages would be preserved and incorporated into an interactive historical exhibit. The digital learning spaces would include oral history stations where elderly residents could share their stories with younger generations. The commercial kitchen would both serve community meals and host cooking classes where traditional recipes could be passed down. The bank vault, when opened the next morning, revealed not just funds for rebuilding, but investments that had grown over 50 years, providing enough to create an endowment for the center's future. Our predecessors hadn't just planned for the building's replacement, they had ensured its sustainability. As we worked through the logistics of temporary meeting spaces and construction timelines, something else became clear. The crisis that had threatened to divide us had instead revealed our greatest strength, our ability to find common ground in unexpected places. The contractors who offered pro bono services, the tech volunteers who created virtual tours of the old building, the historians who worked alongside teenagers to document everything. Each person found a way to contribute their unique skills to our shared purpose. 6 months later, as we gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony of the new community center, my camera captured a scene that echoed the photograph from 1962, but with a difference. Where the original showed a community bravely standing together despite the divisions of their time, ours showed a community standing together because of the bridges we had built across our differences. We created our own time capsule that day, filled with stories of how our community came together during what could have been its breaking point. Inside, we included a letter to future generations, sharing not just what we had learned about our past, but what we had discovered about ourselves. And just as our predecessors had done, we included something special for the day when future residents would face their own moments of crisis and change. The old building's physical foundation may have failed, but its true foundation, the spirit of sanctuary, innovation, and connection it represented, had never been stronger. As I powered down my camera that evening, watching the sunset paint the construction site in hues of hope, I realized that the story of Pine Valley wasn't just about preserving history or embracing progress. It was about recognizing that every generation must find its own way to build bridges between the two. After all, the truest measure of a community isn't in the walls we build, but in our willingness to open our doors to new possibilities and to each other.